Rio wakes up surrounded by clouds, standing before an angel. The angel begins by telling him that he has recently died, yet he won't be heading to the afterlife just yet. In short, Rio has become the latest victim of the infamous truck con. Now, it's up to Michael to send him off to a new world to begin a fresh life. According to Michael, Rio won't be given any special mission or grand objective in this new world. He's free to live as he pleases. When Rio expresses his desire for a peaceful and laid-back life, Michael has no objections. But before sending him off, Michael needs to give Rio a quick overview of the world he'll be reincarnated into. The world is called Phi, a magical land where about 20% of the population can use spells tied to their natural elemental affinity. In Rio's case, his strongest affinity is with a water element. Since Rio asked for a peaceful and laid-back life, Michael went ahead and prepared a cozy little house for him. As a starter kit, he included 2 tutorial books, a knife, and even placed a protective barrier around the house to keep monsters at bay. As part of his beginner's kit, Michael has provided Rio with an ice house stocked with enough food to last 2 months, ensuring he won't face hunger anytime soon. Additionally, Michael included a guidebook containing detailed information on every monster Rio might come across in the region. While this will be useful for dealing with the forest's creatures later, Rio's current focus is on testing out his newfound magical abilities. He steps outside and shouts the spell, "Water come forth," which instantly forms a sphere of water in his hand. Magic turns out to be much simpler than he imagined. Even more surprising, he can cast the same spell just by visualizing the water ball, so saying the incantation isn't actually required. Now that he's confirmed he can use magic, he heads straight to the bathhouse and begins filling the tub with water. However, he quickly notices a problem. He only knows how to produce water, and there's no way he's going to enjoy a bath that isn't hot. So, he goes outside and tries to build a fire to heat the water manually. The only issue is, he has no clue how to start a fire this way. After a while, he gives up and lies on his back in defeat. But as he stares up at the sun, an idea hits him. Rio grabs a basin, fills it with water, and begins focusing on it, trying to compress it while drawing out the heat. Slowly, ice starts to form. With a bit more effort and practice, he manages to shape the ice into a makeshift magnifying glass. Using it, he harnesses the sunlight to start a fire. With the fire finally going, he heats up his bath, which was filled with ice water. By the end of his first day, he's finally able to unwind and enjoy a proper soak. Now that he's mastered making ice, Rio realizes the opposite should also be possible. If he can remove heat to freeze water, he should be able to add heat to create warm water. This becomes his next goal, something he'll need to practice in the coming days. The following morning, as Rio eats breakfast, he starts to think. With only 2 months' supply of food from Michael, he knows he'll need to hunt soon to restock. But he doubts a mere knife will be enough to fend off the forest monsters, so he resolves to begin practicing his attack magic. His first attempt is launching a water ball at a tree, and it works exactly as he imagined. But a small splash of water won't do much in a real fight. He remembers a way to increase the water's force, so he gathers another ball, this time compressing the water into a focused point for more pressure. The idea is sound, but his control isn't strong enough yet. His water jet barely has more power than a toy water gun. Rio recalls something Michael mentioned before his reincarnation. Magic relies heavily on imagination. The clearer the image in his mind, the better the result, and he just needs to keep refining it through practice. After several days of non-stop training, Rio's water jets are starting to take shape and look decent. However, they're still far from powerful enough to take down a monster. Rio has also figured out how to produce hot water, allowing him to enjoy warm baths whenever he likes. However, he's still working on fine-tuning the temperature, as his control isn't quite perfect yet. The next morning, he decides to practice his ice magic once more. This time, he attempts to conjure ice directly from the air, though it's difficult and takes nearly 3 minutes to form. He finally succeeds in creating ice out of nothing. However, unlike water, he struggles to launch it with the same ease. Combat training hasn't been going too well so far. None of the spells Rio has come up with have had much impact. Still, he spends the next few hours pushing himself, practicing non-stop until he finally collapses from mana depletion. Figuring he's reached his limit for the day, he calls it quits. But the very next morning, as soon as his mana is fully restored, he jumps right back into training. This routine becomes Rio's daily life over the next few weeks. Thanks to all his hard work, he can now create ice instantly, making it a reliable offensive spell. With his new set of attack magic finally ready and his food supply starting to run out, Rio ventures into the forest for the first time to begin hunting. He quickly notices a set of animal tracks and decides to follow them, which leads him to a nearby river. While exploring the area, he comes across some quartz by the riverside, something he can use to start fires by striking it against the edge of his sword. He also takes the opportunity to collect some detox herbs, just in case he needs them later. But suddenly, a deep growl rumbles from behind him. When he turns around, he finds himself face to face with a lesser boar, and he freezes in place. The boar charges at Rio, but this is his first life or death battle, so he panics. At the last possible second, he snaps to his senses and leaps sideways, barely dodging the beast's rush. However, the boar isn't finished. It turns, ready to attack again. Luckily, Rio's mind clears just in time. As the boar charges toward him, he swiftly creates an icy path beneath its hooves, causing it to slip. Without wasting a moment, he summons several sharp ice spikes directly in the boar's path, stabbing it and killing it instantly. After butchering the boar, Rio pulls out the monster guidebook to learn more about it. According to the book, the lesser boar is actually the weakest monster found in that forest. The guide itself is clearly intended for beginners, so most of the listed creatures are fairly simple. However, toward the end of the book, Rio notices 2 additional pages that stand out. They look like they might contain something important. One of the pages describes dragons, immensely powerful creatures capable of wiping out entire cities by themselves. The guide strongly advises fleeing immediately if he ever comes across one, as fighting it would be hopeless. That said, outrunning a dragon isn't likely either, so running into one is game over. Another page mentions mysterious beings called Akuma, apparently a type of fallen angel. However, the book offers very little information about them. The book's only advice is simple: if you ever encounter one, you're as good as dead. The following day, Rio heads out to hunt again. But while his guard is down, a giant assassin hawk swoops down from above and launches a surprise attack. The creature uses wind magic to slice through its prey with razor-sharp slashes. Rio has no choice but to run, quickly summoning ice shields to block the incoming blades of wind. He knows hawks are extremely dangerous opponents and would rather avoid a fight, but escaping isn't an option. That means his only choice now is to stand his ground and fight back. He lifts his hand and launches a stream of water jets, but the hawk skillfully evades the attack and dives at him, using wind magic to strike. Rio, however, reacts just in time, forming an ice shield that cuts the hawk across the eye and sends it crashing into the ground. Moments later, the hawk regains consciousness. Though it has permanently lost one eye, it takes to the skies to retreat, but before disappearing, it locks eyes with Rio one last time, etching his face into memory, because now it's personal. Rio lets out a sigh of relief, grateful to have made it out alive. Still, this is far from the peaceful life he had imagined for himself. During the chase with the hawk, he ran so deep into the forest that he ended up completely lost, wandering until well into the night. As he searches for a way back home, he unexpectedly stumbles upon a glowing lake. Right in the middle of it stands a Dullahan, and from the looks of it, the creature has already noticed him. Over time, Rio hones his skills through relentless training, mastering the art of hunting and preserving food with little difficulty. His water magic has grown significantly more powerful. He can now conjure razor-sharp ice sheets and slam them down in an instant. Even his water jets have reached new heights, slicing effortlessly through solid stone. At this point, his combat prowess has become formidable. However, ice magic isn't the only thing Rio has been practicing. Ever since his encounter with the Dullahan, he's ventured into the forest each night to battle it. Strangely, the monster guidebook never mentioned Dullahans. Either they aren't classified as monsters, or they're too advanced for a beginner's manual. Regardless, Rio remains determined to face it. He rushes in with his ice staff and starts swinging, treating the encounter more like a training session than a real battle after all. The Dullahan completely outmatches him in both power and technique. Rio does his best to defend himself, summoning ice shields to block the incoming blows, but despite his efforts, he's quickly overwhelmed and brought down within seconds. Though the Dullahan has never spoken a single word to him, Rio can't shake the feeling that it's taken on the role of a mentor, trying to mold him into something stronger. Suddenly, the Dullahan lifts its sword and channels water magic to lengthen the blade. Rio is taken aback to discover that it can use water magic too. After showing him how the technique works, the Dullahan hands the sword over to Rio and calmly steps out onto the lake. One day, while Rio is out hunting, he is ambushed by the same assassin hawk from their previous encounter. He doesn't remember it being black before. It must have evolved, pushing itself to grow stronger just for this moment of vengeance. The hawk swoops down at Rio, unleashing a barrage of wind slashes. In response, Rio quickly conjures 5 layers of ice walls for protection. But now that the hawk has evolved, its wind attacks are far more powerful, strong enough to shatter all of Rio's defenses in an instant. And now a wave of anxiety begins to creep over him. Rio sprints across the field, throwing up ice walls to shield himself from incoming strikes. When he spots an opening, he fires back with a volley of ice spikes, but the hawk easily evades them, surging forward with a sudden burst of speed, and that's not the only surprise it has in store. The hawk lets out a piercing screech at a frequency that disrupts Rio's magic, causing his ice shields to vanish and leaving him nearly unprotected. But the hawk isn't finished, yet it hovers menacingly in front of him, and Rio senses that a major attack is coming, though he can't predict when. Moments later, Rio can feel electricity in the air as a bolt of lightning is shot straight at him, and an attack like that would have been fatal. But luckily, he was able to use a stick as a lightning rod and jump away to save himself. As Rio struggles to shake off the lingering shock, the hawk swoops down, aiming to deliver a fatal strike with its sharp claws. At the last moment, Rio summons his ice blade and deflects the attack. They exchange several more blows, but Rio remembers his intense training with Dullahan, so he spots an opening in the hawk's guard and drives his sword straight through its neck. As the hawk crashes to the ground, Rio slowly walks toward it, feeling a sense of understanding. He knows what it's like. The hawk lost an eye because of him, and ever since, it's been driven by the need to prove it was stronger, pushing itself to evolve. But Rio has also been working hard to grow stronger, and in the end, despite everything, the hawk was still defeated. Afterward, Rio starts making his way home, but to his complete surprise, a dragon suddenly appears before him. Remembering what the book said about dragons being unbeatable, he's convinced this is the end for him, but to his surprise, the dragon speaks to him through telepathy. It doesn't seem aggressive at all. In fact, it explains that it's just passing through, searching for a black hawk that passed through the area. The dragon simply wants to know if Rio has seen it nearby. Relieved that the dragon isn't hostile, Rio quickly realizes it must be referring to the hawk he just defeated. Nervously, he apologizes and explains that the hawk attacked him first, leaving him no choice but to fight back and end its life. The dragon is in shock that a human like Rio was able to defeat a hawk, though he doesn't appear particularly bothered by it. What really catches his attention is the sword Rio carries. He immediately recognizes it as the Fairy King's blade. For the Fairy King to entrust such a weapon to a mere boy, Rio must have done something to earn his favor. The dragon has grown fond of Rio, and Rio, still lacking much knowledge about this world, was hoping to ask him some questions. The two end up chatting for several hours, well into the evening, but their conversation is eventually interrupted as the dragon says he must return home. Rio expresses his gratitude for the dragon's answers, and the dragon thanks him in return, saying it's been a long time since he's had such an engaging conversation. They part ways with a warm farewell, but meanwhile, up in heaven, Michael is going over the documents related to Rio's reincarnation when he suddenly spots something he had previously overlooked. It turns out Rio was granted a hidden trait, something Michael hasn't seen since he sent a girl to that world 10,000 years ago. In Rio's case, the trait is eternal youth, and Michael finds it rather unusual. Rio heads to the beach, craving salt-grilled seafood, but he's shocked to see a giant shipwreck. He notices a man's dead body, which makes him feel sad, but then he suddenly hears another man's grunt, relieved and happy to realize someone is still alive. Abel remembers how the ship was destroyed by a giant sea monster, and when he wakes up, he's surprised to find himself alive. He looks around and sees his belongings placed next to the bed, so he grabs his sword and walks out of the house. Rio arrives and greets him. Abel is surprised that he couldn't sense him at all. Judging by the way Rio is dressed, he assumes Rio has nothing else to wear, but quickly realizes he shouldn't think poorly of the man who saved him. He introduces himself and thanks Rio for saving him, but Rio mentions that all he did was bring him home, so there's no need to thank him. He shares the sad news that, unfortunately, no one else survived. Abel realizes their bodies must have also washed ashore. He reveals that they were all smugglers, so Rio doesn't need to worry about them, but this shocks Rio. However, before Abel can say anything else, his stomach growls from hunger, so Rio invites him to lunch. While eating, Abel learns that Rio doesn't own any clothes, which surprises him, so he asks why he doesn't buy new clothes. But he soon realizes that since Rio has no money, he can't procure necessities. He thinks he might have offended Rio, but he mentions that there aren't any towns around here, so he can't just buy new clothes. Abel realizes he must have gotten the food by hunting, which impresses him, and he wonders if Rio used the knife to hunt. But Rio reveals that it's only for self-defense and cleaning whatever he catches, because he uses water magic for hunting. Abel is impressed because even in the central provinces, only about half of the population can use magic, and he is part of the ones who can't. Rio remembers Michael told him that the percentage of the magic users is 20%, but Abel is unable to understand his mumbling. So Rio says it's nothing. So Abel asks Rio to take him to the coast since he wishes to confirm something. On the way, Abel asks Rio if he needs a staff since he is a magician, but Rio tells him that he doesn't have one, which shocks Abel, and he thinks Rio is too poor to afford it. He tells Rio that if they run into any trouble, he should let him take the front line. But Rio refuses. Abel insists that it's the least he can do, otherwise his reputation will get tarnished for always being the one getting saved, so Rio reluctantly allows him. As they reach the shore, they are shocked to see that the bodies are gone. Rio thinks either the monsters ate them or the water carried them back into the ocean. Abel reflects that if Rio hadn't saved him, he would have met the same fate, so he's grateful to be alive. Rio remarks that he must be very lucky, and Abel agrees. Abel then mentions that it feels odd for the man who saved his life to be calling him Mr. Although Rio believes Abel is older than him. Since he's requested it, he agrees to call him by his name. This makes Abel happy, as that's how all his friends address him. Rio is surprised that Abel considers him a friend, but as he's thinking about it, Abel informs him that he couldn't find what he was looking for. Rio then asks what he plans to do next. Abel says he needs to find his friends somehow, and the first step is to reach the town of Loon. Although Rio hasn't been there himself, he believes it lies to the north, and that they'll need to trek across that side of the island. Abel then gets an idea and decides to recruit Rio as his guide. Rio agrees, on the condition that he gets at least one day to make his preparations. Rio realizes he won't be able to continue his dream of living a slow life. At night, when he tells Abel that he needs to bid farewell to someone, he is surprised since it's very late, but Rio mentions that the person is only available at this time. As he leaves, Abel remembers how he earlier said that no one else lived around there, but he thinks perhaps he wants to pay his respect to someone, and maybe he wasn't always alone on the island. But nonetheless, it's not his job to intervene in Rio's personal matters. Sometime later, we see that Rio has actually gone to bid farewell to the Dullahan, saying he will be leaving the forest of Rondo for a while, but he feels grateful for the training he has received that has enabled him to survive. He knows he will be away for a while, so he decides to use all his power in their last sparring session. Rio charges forward with full force, but the Dullahan easily deflects all his attacks, leaving him exhausted. Before leaving, the Dullahan gives him new clothes, which makes Rio very happy and promise to wear with pride. The next day, they finally begin their journey, and Rio wears his new outfit, which fits him perfectly, but on their way, they soon run into a lesser boar, so Abel tells him to stand behind him and observe. He charges at the boar, and activates the combat skill called Total Impalement, which creates a hole in the boar's abdomen, and it dies on the spot, impressing Rio. He wonders what sort of skill it is, so Abel thinks a magician like him must have seen it for the first time, but it's very common for swordsmen and other people who use use weapons to fight. The next morning, as they resume their journey, Abel hears a sound and they notice 2 lizards in the marsh. Abel thinks they'll be difficult to deal with in the water, so they decide to take another route to avoid them. As they move along the alternate path, Rio senses that the lizard folk are following them. He informs Abel, who realizes they have no other choice but to fight. Rio tells him that there are a lot of them, so he'll use his magic to take them out. Abel reminds him that he doesn't have his staff, but Rio simply chants a spell and kills them all with icicles, shocking Abel. Together, they take out all the lizard folk. After the fight, Abel asks Rio about the spell, noting that the wind magicians he knows can only cast a single spell per invocation. Rio suggests that maybe it's different for water magic before they resume their journey. Rio uses magic to summon water so they can stay hydrated. However, Abel notices that Rio used a different incantation than before, which makes Rio nervous, and he quickly changes the topic, saying Abel must be imagining things. After walking for a bit, Abel gives Rio a coin, and he's surprised to see it since it's his first time seeing this world's money. So Abel explains that it's a bronze florin used in the kingdom of Nightly, where Lune is located. He further explains that in the central provinces, each mints their own coins, but they all use the same denominations, and Nightly is one of the 3 major nations, with the other 2 being the Debuhi Empire and the Handelu Federation. Rio finds the name Debuhi a bit strange, so Abel wonders if he has a problem with the nation. Rio clarifies that he just finds the name a little unusual. He explains that a nation's name is very important to its people, since they have to introduce themselves everywhere as being from Debuhi, which does sound odd. Rio admits he wouldn't like to introduce himself like that, and Abel thinks he's overthinking it a bit. After some time, they finally get out of the forest, but as they are walking, Abel notices a rock moving, so he gets ready to attack. But Rio creates an ice wall, which blocks the rock. Abel notes that they have been surrounded as they have stumbled into a rock golem's nest, but Rio is surprised to see the rock golems, since he always thought they were humanoid with arms and legs. Abel tells Rio to stay there while he charges forward towards the golems, but his total impalement attack has no effect on it, as it quickly regenerates itself, which shocks him. Rio tells him that he has an attack he wants to try, so Abel tells him to go ahead. Rio creates 10 layers of ice walls joined together and drops them over the golem to immobilize it. Abel is shocked to see such powerful magic, but Rio casually mentions that he's only taken out 2 golems so far and plans to do the same with the rest. Soon they take out most of the golems and only one remains, but surprisingly it isn't moving. So Rio thinks perhaps they draw energy from the ground, and since it's flipped over it can't draw energy from Earth. Just then, Abel notices a big magic stone attached to its bottom, which makes him happy, but he wishes he could collect it from the rest as well. But unfortunately that won't be possible now. On their way, the duo notices a giant hippo sleeping, and Rio wonders if Abel wants to slay it, but Abel has no such ambitions. He reveals that he's never seen it in person, but it appears to be a behemoth. Suddenly, they notice several wyverns approaching, which excites Rio. They'll be able to witness a monster battle from the front row. Abel thinks the behemoth is at a disadvantage, but Rio believes it won't go down so easily. As the wyverns begin to attack, the behemoth gets up and lets out a loud screeching sound that knocks them out, making the wyverns fall to the ground. Rio explains that it used magic negation. At night, as they set up a fire to cook their meal, Rio jokes that he was hoping for a match between Abel and the behemoth, but Abel tells him that's not happening. He mentions that he's heard of traps in dungeons with similar effects, but he's never actually seen magic negation before. Hearing the word dungeon excites Rio, and Abel wonders if Rio wants to hear more about them. Rio says he would like to visit a dungeon himself, so Abel tells him that there's only one dungeon in the central provinces, and luckily, it happens to be in the town they're headed to. Rio jokingly asks why Abel has been hiding this information from him, prompting Abel to get defensive, saying he didn't know he was so interested in dungeons. Rio continues teasing him, asking if he's kept any more important information from him. So Abel asks if he knows about elves and dwarves. Rio tells him that he doesn't, so Abel informs him that dwarves are skilled smiths and they are good at fighting. Also, Lune has a few of them. He further explains that Loon only has one elf, while the rest are settled in the woods, which they never leave, so Rio thinks it's just the way he has pictured. But Abel doesn't believe him since he has never been outside that island. The next day, Rio continues to lead the way and reveals that across the mountain, they'll find a human settlement. Abel wonders how he got this information, so Rio recalls how the dragon told him everything. He tells Abel that it's better if he doesn't know, and he calls his source of knowledge beyond humankind. As they walk, they suddenly sense something approaching from behind. In that moment, a giant griffon appears, leaving Abel in shock, who is frozen in fear. But Rio quickly takes some meat from his sack and throws it into the air, and the griffon grabs it and flies away. They're both relieved to have survived. Abel notes that he was completely stunned, while Rio admits they might not have made it if they had tried to fight it. Abel thinks they aren't built to fight such monsters, and he notes there aren't many reports of anyone running into behemoths or griffons for centuries, so he thinks something is wrong with this place. Rio finds it a bit rude, and he thinks maybe humans aren't looking hard enough, so Abel thinks perhaps these frozen mountains have been keeping them out of human territory. As they're walking, Rio suddenly remembers that the wyverns that attacked the behemoth came from the direction they're now traveling. Soon, they spot some wyverns feeding on their prey, and Abel notes that they can't fight them. It usually takes around 20 experienced adventurers to take down just one, and even then, there are often casualties. Rio thinks that even if they try to avoid them, they'll likely encounter more along the way, and they won't be able to avoid fighting forever. Rio wonders if it would be easier to fight the wyverns while they're on the ground, and Abel agrees, thinking he can use his sword more effectively that way. So Rio steps forward to engage them. He summons several ice spikes to stab the wyverns, and Abel follows up with his total impalement technique. However, the wyvern's screams attract more of their kind. Rio uses an ice attack from above to bring them down, and Abel quickly finishes them off. After the battle, they collect the magic stones. Abel admits he can't believe how easy it was, while Rio wonders if Abel was hoping for a life and death battle just to get his heart racing. Just then, another flock of wyverns is on the way. They both prepare to fight, knowing they have no choice but to defeat them in order to keep moving. After successfully taking them all down, they reach the top of the mountain and are overjoyed to see a human settlement on the other side. After defeating so many wyverns, Rio feels confident, and he believes he wouldn't mind if they came across more of them. But Abel finds this ridiculous because he thinks it would be best if they never ran into those dangerous creatures again. Abel admits that it was surprising how they managed to collect so many magic stones from the wyverns, but he suddenly stops talking as he realizes that they have traveled quite far north. Though Abel is completely clueless about where exactly they've ended up, Rio nervously hopes that they haven't accidentally entered the Dullahan Empire, but Abel quickly reassures that this isn't the case, since the empire is farther north. Rio is relieved, which makes Abel curious about why he seems to hate that place so much. Rio tells him that he has nothing personal against the empire, but he simply dislikes the name, which Abel finds rather odd. Just then, Rio notices a road cutting through the landscape, and Abel observes that it's running east to west, so he looks around carefully and recognizes the area. Rio finds him lost in thought and asks if everything is alright, so Abel explains that if they follow the road west, they will soon reach the town of Kailati. This news excites Rio because he really looks forward to sleeping in a proper bed, but Abel thought Rio wanted to fight even more wyverns. Rio quickly explains that those are two completely different things. Abel mentions that the food in the town of Kailati is delicious and insists Rio should definitely try it. This makes Rio even more excited to visit this new town. A while later, they arrive in Kailati and head to a nearby tavern. While they're sitting there, Abel suggests that Rio should register with the Adventurers Guild, but Rio has no idea what that means. Abel explains that guild registration will serve as his identification, allowing him to enter different towns and countries without paying any entry fees. Abel says that when they arrived in the city, he acted as Rio's guarantor and paid a silver coin as the entry fee, but Rio jokingly asks if it was part of a sneaky plan to make him a servant. Abel keeps trying to convince Rio to join the guild, explaining that they can sell magic stones and monster materials there for a good price. Otherwise, Rio would have to become an alchemist to use those things, which would be a huge hassle. Rio is surprised that they have alchemy in this world, but he's shocked even further when the waiter brings his plate of curry rice to their table. He thinks to himself that, in most Isekai stories, the protagonist alchemist has to travel a lot in order to find curry, but somehow it already exists in this world. Abel asks Rio what he's mumbling about, so Rio says it's nothing and takes the first bite, but it's so tasty that he can't stop himself from devouring it in seconds. Rio orders another plate and asks Abel if they have curry like this in Lune. Abel confirms that they do. He is glad that Rio enjoyed it, and he admits that it was quite tasty. Even the next day, as they leave the town, Rio continues to praise the curry they had the last night, and he asks Abel to spill the beans about the best desserts in town. Abel is caught off guard and doesn't know how to answer, so he just says he'll think about it. They continue their journey, and after spending a few days walking, they finally see the town of Lune from a distance. As they reach the city gates, the guard recognizes Abel and says everyone was worried since he'd been missing for months. Abel explains that he managed to safely return thanks to Rio. The guard excitedly shakes Rio's hand, grateful that he saved his friend. Abel then pays the entry fee, once again acting as his guarantor. The guard then asks if they will be heading straight to the guild and mentions that Abel's friends are currently out of town, but once they return, they will be shocked to see him. Once inside the city, Abel suggests they head straight to the guild to register Rio as an adventurer. Since Abel can help him rank up, Rio is curious and asks what that means. Abel explains that new adventurers usually start at rank F, but with the endorsement of a B rank or higher, they can start at rank E or even D. Rio quickly realizes that this means Abel must be above B rank, which makes him feel proud. While Abel gets shy and quickly changes the subject, Abel goes on to explain that higher ranks allow access to better quests, which also means better rewards. He recommends ranking up, though he adds that Rio probably won't need to worry about money anyway, since they will earn a lot by selling the wyvern magic stones. Rio wonders if the magic stones are really that valuable, and Abel explains that they're actually quite rare. Selling them all at once could even crash the market, but he trusts the guild will know how to handle it. They finally arrive at the guild, where the receptionist, Nina, is shocked to see Abel that is still alive. Soon, all the adventurers gather around him, and Rio realizes that Abel is actually pretty popular. Rio thinks he should give them some space and steps outside the guild to enjoy the fresh air. Just then, an elf girl walks past him and notices Rio wearing the Fairy King's outfit. She mentions he must have impressed the Fairy King quite a lot. Rio is unable to answer properly, so she says she's in a hurry and perhaps they will meet again sometime and walks off. A short while later, Abel takes Rio back inside the guild, where he tells everyone that he survived only because of Rio, who will soon be registering as an adventurer. Abel hopes they will all look after him. Rio is happy to be the center of attention as the others praise him for saving Abel. Moving on, we see Rio's registration process, and Abel says he wishes to recommend him for D rank, but Nina is shocked, since this is the first time anyone from his party is recommending an adventurer. Abel says Rio is very talented, but Nina tells him that she has no problem with it, though according to the rules, they must present some kind of physical proof of strength. Abel says that he was hoping to speak to the guild master about it, so Nina goes to inform the guild master about their request while they wait in the meeting room. When Nina shares the good news, the guild master rushes over, eager to see Abel with his own eyes. He had been very worried about him. He then notices Rio and introduces himself as Huma Glass, the guild master of Lune. He thanks Rio, making him feel a bit awkward, and Rio simply says he was just in the right place at the right time. Abel tells Hugh that he wants to endorse Rio for a rank up, so Hugh asks about the required proof. Abel confidently assures him that Rio is actually stronger than he is. Abel shows him the magic stones, and Hugh realizes that their green color means they belong to wind elementals. Based on their size and vivid glow, he suspects they might be from wyverns, which Abel confirms. Hugh is shocked, finding it hard to believe they managed to collect so many, since fighting that many wyverns would normally require an entire army. He worries that if such monsters were to attack the city, it could be completely destroyed, but Abel reassures him there's no need for concern, as they encountered the creatures far to the south of the Malefic Mountains. Rio is surprised to hear the name, so Abel tells him that earlier, after they found the road to Kailati, he realized where they were. Hugh reveals that it is said no one has made it through those mountains alive, and even experienced adventurers don't go there unless they have a very compelling reason. Hugh can't believe they defeated all those wyverns by themselves, but now that he has seen the physical proof of Rio's abilities, he has no objections to the rank-up request. Suddenly, Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, arrives at the guild. Abel goes to catch up with his old friends, while Rio heads off to finish the rest of the registration process. As Rio enters the guild master's offices, he starts to wonder if he truly deserves the D rank. Hugh explains that while Abel is very gifted, even he can't take down a wyvern alone, so if Rio helped defeat several, he must be exceptionally talented. As Hugh pats Rio on the back to congratulate him, he's surprised by how strong Rio's body feels for a mage. Just then, Nina arrives with the paperwork and properly introduces herself before starting Rio's registration. She begins the short interview by asking his name and confirming that he's a mage. Then she asks about his magic element and he tells her it's water. When she asks where he lives, Rio explains that he just arrived in the city. Nina lets him know that for the first 300 days after joining the guild, he's allowed to stay in the guild's lodgings. Nina asks if he's ever been in a dungeon before, and he admits he hasn't, so she tells him about a monthly introductory dungeoneering course, which offers a full guide for new adventurers and tips on what to watch out for. When Nina asks if he's interested, Rio excitedly says yes. She lets him know the next course starts in 2 days and says she'll sign him up. Nina tells him to be at the meeting room on the 3rd floor at 9 o'clock that day. When Rio looks surprised, Nina adds that there's a clock in town to help him keep track of the time. With that, Nina wraps up the paperwork, but Rio gets confused when she says it's time to start the actual registration. She asks Rio to place his hand on a crystal, and the device instantly creates his guild card, which she then hands to him. Nina congratulates him on officially becoming a registered adventurer. As they leave, Hugh feels relaxed because he was really worried about Abel, since things looked quite grim in his absence. He thinks he would never want to experience that again, which makes him thank Rio even more because he saved them all. He remembers he hasn't informed someone about Abel's return, so he immediately grabs his communication device to make a call. Meanwhile, Abel takes Rio on a walk, and when Rio asks where they're going, Abel tells him they're off to get his rewards for helping him get back to the town. Abel mentions he wants to buy Rio some new clothes and a staff. Rio thanks him, but admits he doesn't understand why Abel keeps mentioning a staff. Abel explains it's because he is a magician, but Rio tells him he can cast magic without one, and he can also use his sword in close combat. Abel is shocked to hear that and asks about the sword, so Rio shows it to him. However, Abel thinks it looks more like a knife than a proper sword. He worries that he might have hurt Rio's feelings, but Rio doesn't mind at all. Instead, he asks for Abel's help since there are still many things he doesn't know about this world. Rio soon learns that a day here is 24 hours, a week has 7 days, and a month has 30 days, basically the same as on Earth. He's surprised to learn that clothing is also measured in centimeters. It feels like too much of a coincidence, and Rio starts to wonder if there might be some kind of connection. Maybe someone else was teleported to this world before him. That would explain why so many things are the same as his home planet. Abel then invites him to his party where Rio is the guest of honor, and he introduces Rio to everyone as his savior. The next morning, Nina walks with him and asks if he had fun last night. Rio says he did, but admits he's just a little exhausted. They soon arrive at the guild dorms, and as they enter the room, they see a guy doing push-ups. When he notices Nina, he gets flustered. She tells them that Rio will be their new roommate, and the two introduce themselves as Nils and Ito. After reminding Rio about his class, Nina leaves. Nils comments on how beautiful she is, while Ito says they should stop being so formal with each other. Just then, Nina returns with another newcomer who will also be joining them as a roommate. Ito thinks the new guy looks pretty young, and Ammon confirms he's just 16. Sadly, after losing his parents, becoming an adventurer was his only option to make a living. Nina tells Rio that Ammon will also be taking the basic dungeon course with him, so they should go together, which they both agree to. Meanwhile, Abel's friend Lynn can't believe that a mage could create a thick ice shield. She thinks they're usually too thin and can be shattered by something as simple as an air slash. She also insists that using it midair to attack an enemy is completely impossible, but Abel tells her that Rio did exactly that. Lynn explains that magic can typically likely only be conjured close to the caster, so none of it makes sense to her. Still, the priestess says that if Abel is saying all this, then it must be true. However, Lynn fears that if Rio were to ever turn against them, it would be a big issue. Or if he joins the kingdom as an enemy. Abel assures them that it won't ever happen. When they ask how he can be so sure, he explains it's because Rio hates the kingdom's name. That was episode 3. Subscribe to not miss the next part.